You think being home alone at night is safe, as long as the doors are locked, until you realize someone, or something, was already inside before you ever turned the key. When the house is quiet, even the smallest sound can freeze you in place. The click of a door, the scrape of a chair, the feeling that eyes are on you from the dark. Most of the time, you brush it off. But sometimes, those sounds mean you are not alone. Tonight, we are going through 3 real accounts of nights where safety turned into fear. They were lived by people who will never look at their homes the same way again. Each one builds deeper, and the last is the kind that keeps even the bravest awake. But before we step deeper into tonight's darkness, a quick warning. Most who watch these accounts make one mistake. They leave without subscribing. If you walk away, you may never find your way back here again. So take a moment, secure your place, and subscribe now. Because what follows tonight will only grow heavier, and you will not want to miss what waits in the shadows next. And while you are here, I want to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Share it below, because the night always feels different depending on where you are. For some, it is already too late. The darkness has begun to move. Clara was not the kind of person who enjoyed quiet weekends alone. She had grown up in a noisy household, the kind of place where televisions hummed in the background, doors slammed without warning, and voices called from one room to another. Silence, to her, felt unnatural. But this particular weekend, she did not have a choice. Her parents had left town for a wedding, and her younger brother was away on a school trip. That left her as the sole occupant of their 2-story suburban home. It was early evening on a midwinter Saturday, and the neighborhood was blanketed in snow. By 7 o'clock, the temperature outside had dropped sharply, and the streets beyond the window were empty. The wind pressed against the sides of the house in gusts, rattling the branches of bare trees, yet the stillness between those bursts of sound made the air inside the house feel heavy. Clara sat on the couch with her laptop open, the blue glow of the screen illuminating her face, while the family's shepherd mix, Bruno, dozed beside her. At first, she dismissed the odd sounds. A scraping against the siding, a crunch of snow just beyond the window. She told herself it was nothing but branches dragged by the wind or animals moving about in the cold. Yet each time she paused the movie she had been half watching, she realized that the sounds had a pattern to them, as though someone were taking careful, deliberate steps around the house. Bruno's ears twitched before his body lifted from the couch. His growl began deep, low in his chest, the kind of sound that no owner could ever mistake for playfulness. Clara swallowed hard, closed the laptop, and pressed her ear to the silence. The first knock was soft, almost uncertain. Clara froze, her hand hovering above the couch cushion. She turned toward the sound, and her stomach tightened when she realized it had come from the back door. Not the front entrance where people would usually call, but the door that led directly into their fenced yard, the one that few visitors ever used. Her pulse quickened as she stood, Bruno barking sharply now, his body stiff. She crept toward the kitchen, which opened into the back door. For a moment, the glass panel revealed nothing but the darkness outside, the faint reflection of her own nervous expression staring back at her. Slowly, she unlocked the deadbolt and flicked on the porch light. The yard lay silent, untouched. The snow was unbroken by footprints. No person, no shadow, nothing that should have produced that sound. Bruno snarled at the glass anyway, his eyes fixed on some unseen presence. Clara's hands trembled as she turned off the light and backed away. Moments later, she heard it again. A scrape, like shoes sliding across ice, circling around the side of the house. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Relieved, she snatched it up, expecting a message from her parents, but the screen revealed an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Static filled the line, a low hiss of interference. She was about to hang up when something faint but unmistakable bled through. The sound of breathing. Slow, steady, and far too deliberate to be accidental. She hung up instantly, tossing the phone onto the counter. Her heart hammered in her chest as she backed into the living room, Bruno pacing restlessly at her side. The scraping grew louder, circling. It was as though someone was walking in deliberate loops around the house, dragging their feet across the frozen ground, letting her know they were there. Clara's hands shook as she drew every curtain closed and double-checked every lock, but each time she paused to listen, the steps continued. Always moving, always circling. Clara had just drawn the final curtain when she felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. She turned her head slowly, dread pressing down on her chest like a weight. There, beyond the thin glass of the back door, a face stared back at her. Pale skin, wide eyes, a smile that did not move, did not blink. It was so close that the condensation from its breath fogged the glass. She gasped, stumbling backward. Her scream cut short as the lights in the house flickered violently, and then went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Bruno barked and lunged, but Clara pulled him back, dragging him toward the hallway. Her body shook as she ran, clutching her phone, fumbling in the blackness. The only sound was the scratching of fingernails against the glass, slow and steady. She slammed herself into the bathroom, locked the door, and collapsed onto the tile. Bruno whined beside her, his ears pricked, body trembling. Then came the sound that made her blood run cold. The sharp metallic click of the back door lock slowly turning. Not forced, not broken, just turning, as though someone had been given a key. The minutes stretched on in suffocating silence. Clara clutched Bruno, her phone pressed tight against her chest, waiting for the sound of footsteps, for the door to burst inward. But nothing came. The house held its silence until the distant wail of police sirens finally broke through. 2 officers searched the property, their flashlights sweeping across the snow. Clara, pale and shaking, pointed toward the back door. They found footprints, clear as day, leading right up to it. Heavy, deliberate, pressed deep into the snow. But what struck them both, and froze Clara's blood all over again, was where the trail ended. The muddy prints did not stop outside. They continued past the threshold, onto the kitchen floor. Inside, Clara swore she had never heard the door open. She had never seen anyone step through. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Whoever had pressed their face against the glass, whoever had turned that lock, had already stepped into the house without a sound. The officers searched every room, every corner, every closet. They found nothing. No intruder. No sign of forced entry. But when Clara finally returned to the bathroom, she noticed something she had not before. On the inside of the door she had locked, muddy fingerprints. And yet, when she reached out to wipe them away, the prints smudged easily under her cloth, just dried streaks of soil, likely carried in on her own shoes when panic had sent her pacing. A long breath escaped her chest, heavy but steady, and the house felt quiet again, the stillness no longer ominous but protective, like walls holding her safely inside. Daniel had always believed he was not easily rattled. He worked long hours as a graphic designer and often stayed up past midnight, the only light in his small-town neighborhood burning from his second-floor window. His house was not old or worn, but the silence that filled it on rainy nights often pressed against him like an unwelcome guest. This particular Thursday was one of those nights. The rain fell steady, tapping against the windows like fingertips. Wind dragged through the trees outside, their bare branches scraping against the siding. Daniel sat hunched over his desk, earbuds in, working through a deadline when he noticed something strange. The music in his ears seemed drowned by another sound, dull and muffled, as though it came from somewhere above. He tugged one earbud free and froze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate creaks overhead, as if someone was walking carefully, heel to toe, across the attic floor. At first, he dismissed it as the wind shifting the beams, or perhaps raccoons sheltering from the rain. But these sounds had weight. Too heavy, too measured. He sat absolutely still, his heart thudding against his ribs as the sound moved from one end of the attic to the other, directly above where he sat. Daniel leaned back, his chair groaning under him, and glanced up at the ceiling. The sound stopped. The silence was immediate, thick and heavy, like something holding its breath. He waited, counting each second, before convincing himself it had to be his imagination. He slid his earbuds back in. That was when the footsteps began again. Only this time, they matched his movements. Daniel stood quickly, pulling the earbuds completely out. His breathing grew sharp and shallow. The sound above him was no longer faint. It had weight, rhythm, and intent. Each creak overhead pressed into his chest like a warning. The lights in his room flickered once, buzzing faintly, before stabilizing again. Bruno had not been there to bark like Clara's dog from the previous account, but Daniel had something worse, complete silence from the rest of the house. It was as though everything was listening with him. He grabbed the flashlight he kept in his desk drawer, thumb running nervously across its switch. With trembling steps, he crept into the hallway. The attic entrance was a pull-down ladder at the far end of the corridor. As he reached it, he swore the ceiling above him groaned with weight shifting from side to side. Suddenly, with a violent snap, the wooden ladder swung down on its own. The metal hinges squealed, echoing through the house. Daniel stumbled back, nearly dropping his flashlight. A sour smell seeped from the darkness above. Damp fabric, rotting food, something acrid that made him gag. He shone his flashlight upward. The beam pierced the gloom, illuminating a crawlspace littered with shadows. The boards creaked again, this time not in the distance, but just above the ladder, directly in front of him. Then came the sound of something scraping, fingernails dragging across the wooden boards. Daniel's stomach twisted. He forced himself to climb one step, then another, until his head rose just above the opening. His flashlight trembled in his grip as he swept it across the attic. In that single sweep, he caught something moving. A figure crouched low, its arms bent at an unnatural angle. Its hands clutched the beams as it crawled forward on all fours, its head tilting toward the light. The beam reflected in two eyes that glared back, wide and unblinking. Daniel fell backward, the ladder shaking beneath him. His heart thundered as the figure crept closer, hand over hand, dragging itself across the floor toward him. The flashlight slipped from Daniel's hand, clattering to the floor below. He scrambled backward down the ladder, his palms slick with sweat, his chest heaving with each ragged breath. He hit the hallway floor hard, but he did not stop to breathe. His eyes darted upward, catching the thin rectangle of darkness at the top of the ladder. Two pale hands gripped the edge, long fingers curling over the wood. Slowly, deliberately, a face pushed through the opening. Its eyes shone wide and glassy in the dim light, its lips stretched in something far too broad to be called a smile. The ladder groaned as the weight shifted downward. Daniel's body froze in place, terror rooting him to the spot. Just as the figure began its descent, the house plunged into total blackness. The light snapped off, the hum of the refrigerator died, and even the rain outside seemed muted. Daniel bolted, sprinting down the hallway, stumbling into the living room. He pressed his body against the wall, his ears straining for any sound. For several long seconds, there was nothing. Then, soft and steady, the footsteps began again. But this time, they were not above him. They were on the stairs, coming down. Daniel fled the house that night, barefoot in the rain, flashlight still lying useless on the hallway floor. He called the police from his neighbor's porch, his voice trembling as he tried to explain what he had seen. When officers arrived, they searched the attic. They found remnants of a presence, old blankets, empty food wrappers, and several of Daniel's belongings that he thought he had misplaced over the past month. Someone had been living above him, watching, waiting. But what unsettled them most was the trail of prints left in the dust of the attic floor. They led directly to the window overlooking the street. The officers assumed the intruder had escaped that way, crawling out onto the roof when Daniel fled. Daniel shook his head. He had seen the figure start to climb down. He had heard it moving closer after the lights went out. The prints ended at the window, but the rain outside had left the roof untouched. No footprints, no sign of anyone climbing out. And when Daniel was finally allowed back inside to gather his things, he noticed something the officers had missed. On the stairs, halfway down, muddy prints. Small, bare, and fresh, as though someone was still inside. Daniel exhaled slowly, steadying himself. The prints faded after just a few steps, vanishing into the worn carpet as though they had never been there. He paused, listening. Only the quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the air. Whatever presence had lingered seemed to dissolve with the silence, leaving the house empty, still, and unthreatening. For the first time that night, Daniel felt the weight of fear lift, replaced by a strange, peaceful certainty that he could finally walk away. Hannah was 16 years old, and she had always considered herself a responsible babysitter. She had taken care of her younger cousin, Oliver, many times before without any issues. But no matter how often she came, her aunt and uncle's house in the countryside never felt entirely safe to her. The property was set back from the road, separated from neighbors by stretches of farmland. At night, when the fields outside fell silent and the sky was blanketed with stars, the house seemed isolated, like a single island adrift in darkness. Unlike the city, there were no car headlights sweeping by, no distant hum of traffic. Out here, the quiet was absolute. That late summer evening, her aunt and uncle left for a dinner in town, leaving Hannah in charge. The sun had slipped below the horizon, and the last traces of light faded from the sky. She followed Oliver through the bedtime routine, brushing teeth, reading a short book, and finally tucking him into bed. As she leaned down to straighten his blanket, she noticed something small but unsettling. The window across the room was slightly open. The latch rested loosely against the sill, unfastened. Her aunt had specifically reminded her that the windows should always be locked before nightfall. Hannah's stomach tightened. She pressed the glass closed, slid the latch into place, and lingered there for a moment. The yard outside was awash in pale moonlight, the grass still and quiet. No movement, no sound, but she could not shake the feeling that the window had not been left open by accident. Someone had been in this room before her. She pulled the curtains tightly closed and whispered goodnight to Oliver, but as she stepped into the hallway, her unease followed her. The silence of the house felt heavier than usual, like the walls themselves were listening. Downstairs, Hannah settled onto the couch with her phone in hand, trying to distract herself with social media. Yet she kept glancing up toward the ceiling, ears straining for any unusual sound. The house creaked faintly from time to time, but nothing unusual. For nearly half an hour, everything seemed fine. Then, just as she began to relax, she heard it. A sound so faint she thought she had imagined it. Tap. She sat up straight. The sound came again, 3 measured taps, like knuckles rapping on glass. Her heart skipped. She muted the television and held her breath. The noise came once more, louder this time, from upstairs. Her chest tightened as she climbed the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. Oliver's door was still cracked open, the soft glow of a nightlight spilling into the hallway. She pushed the door wider and froze. The curtains over the window shifted slightly, though the air was perfectly still. Gathering courage, she stepped forward and pulled them back. Nothing. The yard outside was empty, bathed in cold moonlight. No one was there. She turned to reassure Oliver, but the boy was sitting upright in bed, his eyes wide, his face pale. "There's a man outside," he whispered. His voice trembled. "He's smiling at me." Hannah's blood ran cold. She snapped the curtains shut and pulled him close, muttering that everything was fine, though her voice shook with fear. She tucked him back under the blanket and remained on the edge of the bed, trying to calm both of them. The tapping started again. Louder, sharper. Scraping fingers dragged across the glass with deliberate force. Hannah pressed her hand firmly against the curtain, as if that flimsy fabric could protect them. The sound stopped instantly, as if whoever was outside had been waiting for her acknowledgement. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She realized this was not random. Someone was playing with them. For a moment, the noise ceased, and the silence was unbearable. Hannah thought maybe, just maybe, the person outside had gone. But then she noticed the curtain shifting again, pulling inward, though the air was still. With trembling fingers, she pulled the fabric aside, and her breath hitched in her throat. On the inside of the glass were handprints. Dark, smeared impressions pressed firmly against the window pane, the streaks of mud trailing downward as though wet hands had dragged slowly across it. Her heart lurched. She had just locked that window. No one could have left prints there unless they were already inside. Oliver whimpered and pointed with a shaking hand. His eyes locked on the closet door across the room. It was open a crack, though Hannah remembered closing it earlier. "Hannah," Oliver whispered, "he's in there." The world seemed to tilt. She could hear it now, the slow, steady sound of breathing coming from the closet. Ragged inhales, wet exhales, deliberate, as though whoever was inside wanted her to hear. Her knees weakened, her mind screaming at her to move. She watched, frozen, as the door shifted slightly inward, wood creaking, as if someone inside was testing how far they could push it open. That was enough. Hannah grabbed Oliver and ran. Hannah's bare feet pounded against the stairs, Oliver clinging to her neck as she fled. She did not stop, did not look back, until she burst through the front door into the cool night air. Gravel dug into her soles as she sprinted toward the neighbor's porch, screaming for help. The police arrived minutes later, sweeping through the house. They checked every window and door, every room and closet. They found nothing. No intruder. No forced entry. The windows were latched, the doors secure. The closet was empty except for hanging clothes and old toys. An officer suggested it could have been a prank, someone tapping on the glass from outside before vanishing into the fields. But Hannah shook her head violently. The prints had been inside. She had seen them. Later that night, once her aunt and uncle returned, Hannah forced herself upstairs again, desperate to prove she had not imagined it. She crept into Oliver's room, every muscle tense. The curtains were still drawn, the closet still ajar. Nothing seemed different, until she turned toward the window. Her breath caught in her throat. There were fresh handprints, smeared across the glass from the inside, identical to the ones she had wiped away earlier. Except now there were more of them, higher up, pressed against the glass at face level, as though someone had been standing there all along. And yet, as she stared, the smudges began to fade, slowly, like mist dissolving in the morning sun. Her chest loosened. the air filling her lungs more easily than before. The glass cleared until nothing remained but her own reflection, wide-eyed but unbroken. She let her hand rest against the cool surface for a moment, grounding herself, then stepped back with the quiet realization that the house, at last, was still. As you sit there now, perhaps in the safety of your own home, ask yourself, how safe is it, really? You heard about Clara, alone with the man at the back door. You followed Daniel as he realized he was not the only one living under his roof. And you stood with Hannah as she fled from a window that should have protected her, only to realize something had already been inside. 3 accounts. 3 nights that began in ordinary homes, just like yours. And each one ended with the same question lingering. When you are alone, are you truly alone? I want to hear from you. Which of these 3 encounters shook you the most? Was it story 1, story 2, or story 3? Tell me down below. I am reading every response. And if you want more true accounts that leave you second-guessing the safety of your own walls, subscribe now. Because these are not just tales from somewhere far away. These are warnings. Sleep well tonight, if you can.